who face eternity easily forget what a lifetime means. What an ending means.
You know it doesn't have to be this way.
No, Kunavine. It does. They need me.
Welcome back to End of Dragons Daily. Hope you guys are having a good day, whether you're getting started with it or closing down as you listen in. I wanted to say real quick at the start with these guild recruits that have been going out. If you've been watching the recent episodes, you'll know I've been letting people know they can join Spud, and they'll sometimes appear in the footage in the background. If you send me a mail at certain times, the game has a very, very, very limited cap on the number of people I can respond to without it telling me that I'm spamming. So I think there were actually 1 or 2 people who I invited this week, but never got a response. They have the invite, it's all there, but you know, they never got a little thank you from me. And I just wanted to say to those people, if you're out there, sorry about that. It's ArenaNet's really restrictive spamming. Speaking of footage in the background, today we're staying with the Verdant Brink stuff. I did a whole nighttime meta, and then the video we used some of that footage was just a tiny bit. I think I mentioned that I spawned a Bloodstoned Wyvern while doing the meta, and I talked about the Raptor and the speed of gathering supplies in Heart of Thorns now that mounts are there. But the footage I actually showed you was the boss part of nighttime, not the main bit. So today I'll show you the main bit, because hey, why not? All I've really been doing in game is more Drizzlewood, and there's been so much of that in this series so far anyway. And finally, yes, the Jade Sea is still on the table, but not today. We're going to pull a bit of a Buzz Lightyear here, and instead just talk about some miscellaneous comments that were spurred from yesterday's video, which I think was a pretty interesting topic. A lot of you guys responded well to it, and you know, it was interesting enough that I felt like I could dedicate a whole part to it, so maybe we're onto something. And if you missed that, we were talking once again about the trailer and the appearance of the Aetherblade icon there, and perhaps what this might mean with Scarlet and some of the stories that are coming up. Kimbo says, since you mentioned it, I can't stop wondering about what the other undiscovered Easter eggs are. Perhaps that the second dragon speaking to Kunavang is actually Albax, the salt spray dragon of good fortune. What good fortune might he share? Also, there is miasma in the trailer. Doesn't this mean that the source of the miasma still exists? So, on the first idea of it being Albax, I don't know whether we could really call that an Easter egg. You know, I think the dialogue in the trailer is very explicit in getting us to wonder what is going on, who are these characters, and to pose that question. An Easter egg to me is something that you hide in plain sight, or maybe not so much in plain sight, but is referential to something else, maybe only get clued into it at a later date. You know, there's got to be some level of secrecy to an Easter egg, surely. And I don't think anything, therefore, to do with the dialogue is necessarily Easter egg-ish. It's just going to be a mystery that hooks us to buy the product, and then once we get in there, it will be revealed. The idea that Albax is talking in there, I think it's a good theory. Hopefully I covered that when the trailer first came out. I'm pretty sure we went over all the main candidates in terms of dragons that could be conversing. And obviously we did have a raid wing that kind of nodded towards that a little bit as well, even though I unfortunately missed that on my original stream run through, you know, what Goran had done, and that was an Easter egg to do with Albax there. Now, hear this thing about the miasma. This I actually kind of like. This kind of weird purpley haze. It's a very, like, kaleidoscopic, multi-spectrum, very colourful trailer that I think you could just sort of read into as they're trying to have it be very vibrant, just like, say, Path of Fire was very vibrant with the post-processing and stuff. They just want that to be the style of it. Maybe because of all the chaos magic around and the prismatic dragon on our side and stuff, you know, these were colour ideas to go for. Or maybe, yeah, it could be to do with the miasma. If people don't really know, you know, the plague that affected the storyline in Guild Wars 1 factions that swept over the whole nation, some of the earliest signs of the plague, aside from just like infected people, sick people, was in very, very bad areas, this miasma on the floor, particularly the Temple of Zendaijan on Xingji. And if you walked into it, it applied massive degen to your team and spread, and unlike other conditions, you can actually get rid of it easily. You needed to summon the powers of the Kirin and so on. And yeah, the colour and the purpley hazy mist effect of the miasma in Guild Wars 1 is very similar to, you know, how this trailer feels. And so now we're talking about the idea of what if that comes back in End of Dragons. The first question is why? Because the Affliction and that story really was a Shiro-centric thing, and I think the Shiro-centric stuff might be easing out. I don't really, as much as we're going back to this area of the world and that it's going to be a big nostalgia bomb, I don't think that I want to see another Shiro thing. I mean, if the Jade Sea is still Jade, and we'll be talking about this on on the next part more. If the Echovowed Forest is still largely stone, I mean, these are very much tied to the disaster at the Harvest Temple and the Duena ceremony and Shiro. But beyond that, and maybe a little bit about the envoys in general, I kind of don't want to look at him much. You know, some people have been saying they want an Easter egg to do with Shiro if you are a Revenant channeling Shiro. That would be nice, but they didn't really do something like that with Malix when you're in the Desolation in Path of Fire, right, which they equally could have done. So, you know, I'll take what I can get, but something minor for Shiro. I don't really want a full infection story again. That said, long-term fans of mine will know that one of my, like, headcanon fantasies for returning to Cantha, and this is a very long-term thing I've been thinking about, because remember, most of us thought that Heart of Thorns was not going to be Heart of Thorns. Most of us thought the first expansion was going to be Cantha. It's been a question that people have been asking since Season 1, and even before. I've always liked the idea that somewhere in the city, and, you know, we talked about this a couple of days ago, in these deep alleys, it's really dank and gross. Maybe we're in a sewer area, very hot, very humid, and somehow there is some leftover infected, and there might be something of a side quest, maybe like one meta event as far as Guild Wars 2 is concerned, dealing with the threat of this escaping, and maybe the devs can do a little thing there. But then, even if they did that, and that would be cool, and it's, you know, deep under the city, and that's it, that still doesn't make sense why it would be in the trailer. So I don't know, unless they're going to explain something further about this madness, and they're going to tie it to the idea of Bloodstone madness that we saw with the Bloodstone explosion, and, you know, maybe what afflicted Balthazar and what's going on with Lissa. If they've got some really big story that binds it all together, and the envoys as well, and I remind you guys that the Spirit Veil, which was kind of dealing with the Bloodstone madness too, also had an envoy collection for the original Legendary Armor stuff. Maybe they can tie that all together, but I'll tell you, as someone who's been following this story and all of its convoluted, you know, strangling little bits flailing about all over the place, I don't think it's going to be easy. I doubt they'll try it at all. I mean, they struggled enough with the Cormyr scene in Path of Fire at the library. I'm happy to be proved wrong, though. Next, we have Amala B, who said, oh yeah, included in all the item changes in the last patch, there was also a change to the Watchwork Sprockets and Blade Shard acquisition. Maybe that's related to upcoming Aether Blade content. Really good point. I wanted to mention this yesterday because I'd just done the patch video, and then I thought, oh, I'll do End of Dragons Daily. I saw this connection because I just happened to deal with these two things at once. Didn't even include it in the commentary. It's a really good idea, isn't it? That why are the devs actually looking at Sprockets, and why are they looking at the Blade Shards and stuff like that? Well, probably because we'll be able to kill more of these guys soon. It could also mean that there might be something of a change to Edge of Mists and bring it more into the fold for World vs. World and stuff, but at the risk of dragging us back into another World vs. World conversation, and believe me, if there's anything that incites core World vs. Worlders, it's the idea of making the Edge of the Mist borderland more serious. I think I'll just move on from this, but it's a very good point, and I'm sure it's not a coincidence. I look at a lot of the updates at the moment as just prep for the expansion, really. It's one of the only reasons I find those patch videos interesting to do for now, because they do seem to have eased off, especially in matters of balance and stuff. Next, we have mdcclxxvi. Now, is that Roman numerals for some number in the millions? Or thousands, perhaps? It's got to be more than thousands, hasn't it? Anyway, oh gosh, I hope they don't go in on the xenophobic angle and make this some political expansion about borders. That would suck so much ass. Now, I had a few comments like this, and I'm glad you've said this. Even just on that previous mention that maybe they'll talk about the xenophobia and the isolationism, there have been a good amount of you guys that have stood up against that and said you don't want to see that story. Maybe you do like the idea of more personal, faction-oriented dynamics and conflicts, not so much Elder Dragon good versus bad. Maybe you want that, but a lot of people don't seem to like this particular thrust, the xenophobia, the isolationism, basically a story that they set up in the Movement of the World all those years ago, but maybe people aren't that interested in. And I saw another great comment from one of you guys. Unfortunately, I never took a screenshot of it, but you basically said, look, didn't we kind of do that with Joko? And I mentioned that in passing before, but I really do think that's true. Unfortunately, it was just half of one Living World season, but the subject material was there. I think it was delivered pretty well. Even if you look at the corner release, which was a part of that arc, and generally people look down on, we only look down on it from like a gameplay perspective, I should say more precisely, open world perspective. When it actually comes down to the instances and the story you go through in that patch, it's really not bad. And in fact, for gameplay, navigating all those traps and the regular break bars and the environmental items you can pick up to break them, I actually think was really, really, really well done. And unfortunately, I don't think that ArenaNet realized just how solid the gameplay was, especially with that break bar interaction for that mission, and I haven't seen them do stuff like that enough in the Icebrood Saga following. Anyway, so we've kind of done that story. A lot of you guys have stood against it, and I remember as well when those Joko patches were coming out, and this isn't necessarily an opinion I agree with, but I saw enough people saying that I think you have to take note of it. A lot of people said that it was like distasteful, and they thought it was too on the nose in terms of being analogous to what was going on with American government at the time and all this kind of stuff. That people didn't want politics that felt close to home, so to speak. They played games to escape, and these subjects were too big and heavy for them or whatever. And again, can I just say, I disagree with all of those opinions. I really don't think I have very much in common with a person who says that at all. But I have to admit, a lot of people were saying it, and when that happens, you maybe have to course correct a little. And at the end of the day, that idea for Cantha being written in the movement of the world in 2008, maybe actually even 7, it wasn't with the original PC Gamer article, was it? Maybe it was a little bit later? Or was it with the original article? A long time ago, these concepts were like fancies penned in a different climate. And maybe they're not appropriate for everyone anymore. I almost feel weird saying that out loud, but I got a few comments yesterday, and that's what got me thinking about. EmberSapphire says, and this is about the structure of Kaineng, there is precedence for tall building design. Take a look at the Iron Citadel. Each floor is too high for the Springer. Imagine design like this, but spread out. Now, that's really funny, because they did not deliberately make the Black Citadel to have certain levels to anticipate the release of a jumping rabbit mount however many years later. That just kind of worked out. And, you know, there's so much Corteria stuff you could take a Springer back to. Eventually one of these areas was going to line up nicely. But I do think you have a point. And my main example, I mean, the Black Citadel is a pretty good example, especially if you look at like the Gladium Canton, you know, that small section of the Black Citadel that's kind of a slummy area. You have to walk into an elevator up either from the ruins of Rin or down from the main promenade where you can see all the little char cubs at the Farrar learning about their history. You come into this like weird slummy area where there's just a lot of higgledy buildings sort of slumped together. That feels very Kaineng to me. And you know, the other main example I'd go to is not the Black Citadel, it's actually Divinity's Reach. I think Divinity's Reach with the upper levels and the high bridges, and then the lower levels, I can imagine that feels kind of Kaineng-y. I already talked in the previous part about the interiors, but if you think about it as well, and this is kind of rubbish nowadays with mounts, but the outer wall of Divinity's Reach has all those like houses stacked together, which when viewed from afar, they can kind of trick your perspective, and it makes it feel like it's a very vibrant city with lots of people living there. It's just you can't explore there. Of course, nowadays, hell, even when gliding came in, frankly, I would say, or even when the Crown Pavilion got remade and you could climb on the giant eagle and get pretty close. If you do glide or if you do mount and sky scale and stuff over, you realize that it's just pathetic. These are like little mini houses and there's nothing real about it anymore. But that kind of thing that they did with Divinity's Reach, I think maybe they could pull off at Kaineng as well. You know, another really funny thing about Divinity's Reach, you guys know I love the alphas, and I love the early versions of the game when the trait system was totally different and we had energy potions and all the gear was acquired differently. Back then, if you looked at a world map of Divinity's Reach, there was a whole extra area. There were the ones we know, the Ossen Quarter, the Salma District, the High Gardens, and so on. They even took you through on demos. But existing only on the world map, when you enter Divinity's Reach, you actually skipped through a whole other district, like a waterfront district, that was very prominently there on the map art. But then by the time the game came out at launch, they deleted it all off the art because I guess they realized they weren't going to actually make it in the actual game. But what that meant was Divinity's Reach felt even bigger in the alphas, and it felt even richer because there was the implication of more stuff going on, even if you couldn't really get a grip on it. And that's what Guild Wars 1 did so well with Kaineng itself. So, you know, Divinity's Reach and all those buildings together, I think is a great thing that they can do. They just need to make it bigger, bigger to account for the fact that these mounts are there, which makes so much of this so much harder, really. I mean, if mounts didn't exist in Path of Fire, I think we might have got a more compelling Vabby, really, in terms of feeling like a civilized, built-up area. But instead, we get these massive buildings that are very, very distantly spread out. And, you know, the solution, we talked about it in the earliest parts of this series. EchoHippo says, even though I wasn't a player when Season 1 was a thing, I've been intrigued by Scarlet as a villain. She's arguably one of the best antagonists this game has ever seen, but she has been lacking her own motivations and ambitions. Well, to be fair, a lot of Kiara's motivations and ambitions were, you know, she had a long story before the whole corruption and before going into the machine and everything we saw in Season 1. Most of the stuff we know about her was her acting on her own and her being this genius Mary Sue character that could do nothing wrong. Everything she did appears to be influenced by the Jungle Dragon. Again, I disagree with that. Sending the Aether Blades into the Mist is the only decision she makes that doesn't work towards the goal of awakening the dragon, because she knew that this goal would be completed after the Assault of Lion's Arch. This decision implies that Scarlet had plans of her own and that she planned beyond the awakening. I wonder if End of Dragon's story is going to be related to Scarlet's unknown plans. Maybe she's going to appear within the story. She was insane but also a genius. Defying death or even plotting her own demise only to return later seems like the thing she's capable of. Man, I could talk so long about Scarlet here. It's really interesting. I mean, is this just this little bubble? Is this just the way we've handled the discussion in these couple of videos? It really feels like the community's completely swung around and done a 180 on Scarlet. People hated Scarlet. They had a great direction for her, brilliant voice actor, really cool idea, but the way that she was handled in Season 1 and delivered, people loathed her. They thought it was really shoddy writing, and I especially remember one of my video essays from around that time was saying, you know, people were blaming Scarlet for all of Season 1's problems, but I was saying, no, Season 1 has other problems. You're using Scarlet as a bit of a scapegoat here. Let's talk about what Season 1's actually doing wrong. Scarlet was loathed, and loathing Scarlet was one of the only things that united people. If not loathing Scarlet, it was loathing the size of the patches during Season 1. Like, those were the two big hot topic items, as well as questions of where's more endgame, where's an expansion. You can pretty much sum up like 2.5 years of Guild Wars 2 discussion with those 4 items. And now here we are talking about, you know, being excited about her coming back. And I am personally excited about that idea. I like anything that creates more consistency and cohesion, and, you know, to have Scarlet be a role of some kind, whether major or minor, but to have some influence on End of Dragons makes Season 1 feel less distant, less vestigial, less unnecessary. You know, I like things to be bound together, even if the writing for the character herself, you know, was a little bit difficult to swallow sometimes for me, as well as for many other people. And, you know, it's not been that long since we had Scarlet. We did see her in Season 4, right? Sort of, with the crazy mushroom interdimensional stuff at Jahai Bluffs, which was a friggin' fantastic patch. I don't think they got her to do new VA, though, did they? I mean, they must have been reusing that from somewhere else. But, yeah, we got a little bit of Scarlet there. I feel like enough people know. And the other thing as well, this question of, like, should they do Scarlet if so many people have forgotten? I think that's a very valid question. Well, I think that's kind of true for so much of Guild Wars at this point, especially when they're doing expansions like this, where it's like, we're going back to Cantha. Like, when they make that statement, we're going back to Cantha, and I'm not saying they have done that exactly, but tacitly that's what's going on. They're really appealing to people who played a game over a decade ago. They're appealing to the GW1ers, right? And that is a shrinking proportion of the community. So at many levels, I think that ArenaNet are entrenching a necessity to know earlier stuff that's even out of the reach of a lot of players. You know, a lot of people don't appreciate the story to this game on the level that I do. I know that for a fact. It's because they don't remember as much, or they weren't paying attention for as many years for so long, so they miss out. But ArenaNet's been happy to cater to those who are really dedicated. You know, I always look at that as a fundamental difference between Guild Wars 2's Living World and the way that Elder Scrolls Online has been handling itself. In the Elder Scrolls Online, as far as I'm aware, each time they do an update, it's on like a new story. That means you don't have had to have followed this epic saga the whole way. It's kind of like a thing in isolation that you can comfortably go to, and you can play in any order. At least that's what I've been told about it. And in a lot of ways, I think that's actually smarter for capturing a larger audience and keeping people enthusiastic and so on. So I think Guild Wars is in this position, and yeah, a lot of people might have forgotten about Scarlet or never experienced Scarlet, but I think it's exactly ArenaNet's MO and likelihood that they would bring her back. A really cool thing to think about, and I was happy to see a comment on this yesterday as well, is the flavor text on the Aether Blade backpack. Sorry, the Spinal Blades backpack, that's what it's called. You know, this was like the original cool item that you could build up and it would continue expanding cosmetically. You know, this thing even predates Marjorie, right? And when you get to the final tier of it, I think it's the Spinal Blades backpack. I'm not sure whether it's a specific color. There's a little quote from Kaith on it, from Scarlet on it, and she's speaking to Kaith, and she's saying, "The world needs me. Someday you'll see that I'm right about this." I'm paraphrasing, but that's the idea. And so there's a lot of players that have got this prestige item, and when they mouse over it, it's got this little message from Scarlet, who's been dead for years, saying to Kaith, a still prominent character in the story, someday you'll see, Kaith, that the world needs me, the world needs what I'm doing. So will that be revealed in End of Dragons when this whole thing with the dragons comes to a conclusion and the Aether Blades return in the middle, or having now completed whatever task Scarlet set them about upon? I think it's a really cool idea, and I'm getting very keen on seeing what the expansion does with that. Marshall says, wasn't there a theory of Mai being Marjorie's lost sister, and that is why she allowed her to escape? Perhaps we'll get some family stuff to solve in Cantha, the homeland of these people. Well, look, I think that they will do stuff about Marjorie's family, for sure. You know, they've done plenty on Casimir, and I hate how we always pair these two characters whenever we discuss one another's story, but to a certain extent, I think it's to be expected now. But yeah, there's still a lot that they can talk about. I've still very much enjoyed the ideas that E is somehow related to Marjorie's stuff, if the whole E is Farron thing doesn't end up going anywhere. E, who's been mysteriously missing from Icebrood Saga, by the way, guys, right? Like, it's been a while since we've heard anything. Do you think it will maybe be a big cliffhanger or something? Anyway, that's a different topic. Even though I think we'll get a little bit out of Marjorie's story, maybe even a lot out of Marjorie's story, I don't know whether they'll say that Mai Trin was Marjorie's sister. Now, this works for quite a few good reasons, and one of the most compelling ones to me is just to think about the timeline of when various characters were added. Mai Trin was conceived of and implemented as a character right around the same time that Marjorie was conceived of and implemented as a character, both in the first half of Season 1 while they were going for these things. So I can definitely imagine, behind the scenes, this little note was there, these two characters are going to be revealed to be linked later, and you know, maybe that even motivated the Season 1 team back in the day, as suddenly Season 1 was being asked to wrap up. They thought, oh, we'll push Mai to the side for now to do the Marjorie thing later, so we'll have her go into the mists, right? I can imagine that happened in the writing room very clearly, and maybe they'd bring that back. But here's the thing, this is also kind of like a joke theory now, because if you guys don't know, there's an NPC wandering around in Lion's Arch that is kind of like a reference to crazy lore speculators online. People like me, people that you find on the forums, people that you find on Reddit, that love talking about the lore and come out with these wacky, wild theories. He's called Wide-Eyed Miller, and he says all kinds of nonsense. He's got a lot of voice-acted dialogue. One of the things of nonsense he says is this Mai and Marjorie thing. And because he's saying it, I now believe it can't be true. Well, either that, or ArenaNet are having fun, and they're saying, well, let's put a bunch of wacky stuff in there, but one of the stories is true. And this will be the one that was true. And everyone will go, oh, so it is true one day. And maybe that one day is End of Dragons. So it could all come true. Next, we got Adraki, who says, let's W 15 minutes, what the fuck? Yeah, I know. When we were doing one topic yesterday, here's the thing. I did a couple of episodes, or maybe just one, that ended up slightly over the allotted time. I'm aiming for 15 to 25 minutes. That's really what I'm aiming for with this series. That's what I would consider bite-sized. And, you know, I did like a 27-minute one earlier in the week. If you can be happy with it being a minute over, then you could be happy with it being a minute under sometimes, okay? I don't even think it was a full minute under, was it? It was a matter of seconds. But yeah, guys, you know, I'm really enjoying this series. I want it to keep going, but if it's going to be daily, you know, I'm really trying to pace myself. I don't want burnout, and that means we'll talk as much as we're going to talk. I'm not going to pad anything. In fact, that's very rarely been true, but I'm going to be happier to be shorter. Which brings me to the final question from Ben, who says, well, not really a question, but a good idea. I'd like to see more of Saeeda the Sly, or at least let her make a cameo with all this airship stuff. She did feature in most of the Season 4 episodes. This is excellent. I hadn't thought of this at all. I want to give you a gold star because, yeah, I think, just as I was talking about with the Scarlet thing, I want the story to feel cohesive. I want things to matter. I want characters that were introduced to have some kind of meaning or payoff, or at least good length of time with us before fading into obscurity like our friend Kanak has, right? I would like to see more from Saeeda because really, she only got what feels like a few moments in the spotlight in Season 4. And that's about it. Season 4 introduced a lot of interesting new characters that I thought we might be transitioning into, and now they're just kind of not around very much. So I think it makes a lot of sense for them to be there in End of Dragons, and especially this idea that we have Corsair airships, like a fleet of them, versus a fleet of Aetherblade airships. Oh, that would be badass. Season 4 did a lot of really good things with airships, like flying over to the giant Inquest, like cube that was being built in the sky and, you know, bombing things. In Dragonfall, having an actual physical airship flying in massive circles around. They've been doing had been doing cool stuff with airships, but the one fantasy we still really haven't seen much of is the idea of airship v airship battles, you know? And this would be a great opportunity for that. Hell, you could have a bunch of dragons in the sky at the same time, because this is Cantha after all, and there are salt sprays around. Let's put the salt sprays way up in the air this time, you know? It looked like they could fly in the original game, so let's have them super high up. Let's do something like what we saw in Ore, where there were airships fighting dragons that were like to quote all the sunless or whatever, but way up in the sky. Except now we're on sky scales and we're on airships of our own, and there's actual combat and interactions going on. Bring back the Bloodstone Fen gliding, you know, airborne abilities. They could do some great stuff, and more opportunity for Saeeda would be brilliant too. I quite like the character. So there you go, guys. That's a little bit more about End of Dragons. Again, I'm keeping the floor open for Jade C stuff, but you got anything amazing to say, I'll be reading as always. Just a reminder, I read every comment, really. So anything you type down there, I've been really appreciating it, especially the nice messages from you guys. As long as the views hold steady and hopefully grow a bit, and you guys keep being so nice, I'm feeling very, very good about this. Thank you all. I'll see you next time. Have a good day.